Welcome back to another episode of Alternative Space History, and we're going to start this year off with a very quick Drako III altitude rocket. This is more or less just to grab a few extra funds before moving on with the rest of the year. Our main goal this year is to get the X03 and X05 planes at least configured and get orbital for the first time. We're going to start off with the design of the X03 plane. Now, this particular unit is essentially going to be an upgraded variant of the X01. We're going to be using the upgraded cockpit as well as the supersonic variant wings, which will allow us to have a little bit more temp resistance when we're doing the higher speeds, which is the ultimate goal of this particular ship, is to get it to go a little bit faster than the X01, as well as be able to achieve new heights in flight. There will be a few contracts we'll also be aiming to do a little bit later down the road, and that's just to kind of keep the funding that we will be using with the R&D costs of these airplanes. Outside of the planes we'll be putting together, we're going to be launching the Dragon 1 and hopefully getting it orbital by the end of this year. We have a few of them in queue just in case. Unfortunately, a lot of the engines we'll be using are fairly new for the program, so we don't quite have the data to have them run at their most efficient, or have them run as efficient as they could be, which could lead to failures and a failure to orbit. One of the biggest differences between the X03, which is what you're seeing me build here, is it's going to be using the twin engine function, which is actually something NASA toyed with the X15 plane before switching over to the bigger engine variant. We're going to sort of follow that path. I do have the upgraded versions of the XLR11 unlocked, since I do have orbital rocketry unlocked, but I wanted to use slightly less fuel consuming engines and using two of them in place so I can still get the speed I want without needing as much fuel as before. Once we get to the X05 variant, which will be longer, a little bit more sleek, shorter wings, and a little bit more fuel, we'll start to kind of push for more upgraded versions of the XLRs, and eventually we will be using the XL99 spaceplane engine, which is essentially the big engine version for the X15. That would be the ultimate end goal, is to be able to achieve a Kerman line suborbital launch, but we have to wait until we unlock the correct cockpit and everything else, which will be probably a few years from now. Once we start getting orbital and getting scientific satellites in the air, we'll be able to generate tons of science, which is sort of where I'm heading for, because my R&D building is very upgraded and I'm running out of things to research, unfortunately. And we haven't been collecting science as much as we could be lately. For the most part, this particular plane will only be used a few times, I believe. It is more of a stepping stone to the X05, which again we will be doing the prototype at the end of this episode, and it will be doing its debut flight. Just for a little spoiler alert, will be flown by Ziggy Kerman, by his request actually, which X05, aka Blackhawk, is the code name for it. We'll be attempting to break the speed record set by NASA last year, as well as complete a couple of the X-plane contracts that we have sitting in the mission control building as of now. I still have to find a way to make money with these planes so I can keep up with the cost that it is to R&D them. Just here I was kind of trying to decide which variant of which engine I wanted to use, as well as kind of try to find the best configuration for this particular twin engine setup. The other biggest difference between the XL3 and the XLR5 is going to be RCS control, since the X05 will be going for new altitude height achievements. But our next goal here is to get our Dragon 1 on the launch pad and get ready to give it its maiden flight and attempt to go orbital for the first time in the year 1954. And if all goes according to plan, we will be able to achieve orbit. Without further ado, let's roll this out to the launch pad and see what it can do. And we had successful liftoff. I am using the MechJeb Smart Assist unit because it works a little bit better than the stock SAS, and later we will be using MechJeb Ascent Guidance to launch our more automated rockets, just to kind of keep this as realistic as possible. I did start my turn a little bit later than I intended to, but as you see here, I messed up my staging. It glitched out, and I was kind of hopeful that it would work, but it didn't. So this launch, unfortunately, was a failure. But we're going to switch over to J. Fox Kerman's maiden flight, the 30k meter attempt in the X03H on 6/7/1954. I also filmed the first part of this differently than when I filmed the second part of it, and I updated the skybox as well as the visual mods that RSSVE just released for 1.10. I didn't use all of them, obviously, because we're still running this in 1.8, but look how pretty that sky is. That is actually why we're doing this launch at night, because I wanted to show you guys the new skybox feature that comes with that mod. But you see here that red warning thing started flashing as soon as we hit 30k, which was the goal. But the R&D department did make sure he had plenty of oxygen to survive the little skim he did breaking the 30k milestone. In fact, he was so overjoyed he decided to play around a little bit in the X05 while flying over the city next to the space station. As I said before, this is his first flight, and Mr. J. Fox is actually new to New Horizons, so we wanted to give him a chance to try something interesting out. Unfortunately, he did come in a little too hot on his first landing attempt, so we had to have him come back around and try again. Now, unfortunately, I am not a very great pilot, so I was not able to get it lined up with the runway as I wanted to, so we attempted a grass landing like before. The drogue chute is still not functioning correctly for some reason, and I'm still working on getting that fixed. But it looks like we'll have enough braking power to land, and J. Fox is totally fine. Now we move to the X05 build, which again is going to be a longer variant of the X03. Mostly so we can add a little bit more fuel to it and use slightly better engines to get some more speed out of it. This is the rocket we're building to attempt to break the speed record set by NASA in 1953, which was roughly 940 meters a second. And we're hoping to break the 12k barrier if we can using the X05. There was a bit of a design flaw with it, unfortunately, which we find out a little bit later, but we forgot to upgrade the control surfaces on the wings, and those control surfaces can't quite handle the speed of the 1200 meters, even when we were roughly 20k up in the air. But you see here, I'm making some minor adjustments to this plane, and I'm basically going to leave the original concept of the X05 alive, but we're going to shorten the wings down to reduce the drag. That way, once we get a little bit higher up in the air, we can really put those engines to the test and see if we are able to reach higher speeds. My ultimate goal was to break 1,000. I wanted to shoot for the 1,200, even if it wasn't possible. I figured 1,000 is a good goal nonetheless. But here in a second, we're going to swap back over to the VAB to make some minor changes on the Dragon rocket we're about to launch. I more or less just wanted to upgrade the avionics and add some scientific equipment to it. That way, while it's in orbit, if it makes it, we can collect a little bit more science, since I have been kind of not... I haven't been paying attention to the science, to be honest. I've been more focused on getting planes to work. So I haven't really... been working on any scientific achievement, and we're going to start focusing on that a little bit more. But this is our Dragon 1 with the SciSat 1, which is the scientific satellite that we kind of adjusted and put on there, and hopefully this will be the first satellite to achieve orbit. I did slow part of this footage down, mostly because I had a lot of people asking how to do the first orbital rocket situation, so I did kind of slow this down to originally try and explain what I'm doing, and then I screwed up the ascent really bad, so I figured I should just kind of go through it. Normally you want to be tipping a little bit faster than I am. You want to push that prograde marker to that 45 degree, but you want to stay inside of it. The best way to do this is to basically basically turn right and just stay on the very edge of that prograde marker. Unfortunately, I held out too long, so I had to do a very aggressive turn last minute and get flat as soon as I possibly could, and I hope this next stage ignites. Which it looks like we were successful on the ignition. The AJ-10 did fire up, so as long as it completes most of its burn, we do have it set to have fuel to burn 1 more second than it's rated for, but that was more or less for wiggle room. As long as this can do a majority of its burn, the top stage should be able to get us into orbit. Now, unfortunately, I didn't check, and I should know better, but I forgot that you had to be 200 kilometers or 200,000 meters above the surface for the scientific contract, and we only went up to about 170, 180. So even though this has every other aspect to complete that goal, this mission, that contract cannot be completed on this launch, unfortunately, and that was me not paying attention. But it looks like our Aero B stage was actually successful in its ignition, so hopefully it burns to completion and we'll have the first satellite in orbit in the year 1955 or 1954. Sorry about that. Either way, we're just going to kind of speed this up. We have hit orbital velocity and we are officially orbital. It did not do the weird camera thing for some reason where it flips around and gives me a headache, which I'm not actually going to complain about. But the Aero B completed its full burn, and we released a satellite, which is in a very eccentric orbit around Earth right now. And this was the point where I realized that I wasn't at the 200,000 mark, so I couldn't complete that contract, but we were able to complete the first artificial satellite contract. My next launch attempt with this rocket, which will be the same payload, I'm just going to try to aim for a little bit higher of an orbit, just so I can complete that particular contract, and then we're going to be going for a polar orbit rocket shortly. But first I wanted to add some solar panels and make this probe core, or I guess the procedural avionics unit, a little bit bigger, just so I can pack a little more electric charge in there. That way we can have it sustain for a little bit longer and really get the most out of some of those scientific experiments. The early TV camera is going to be very helpful when we do our first polar orbit, since it's biome specific and a polar orbit covers most of the biomes. So because of that, we'll be able to generate tons of science off that unit. Even though it's not a very high science gain, it's multiple biomes and it adds up after a while. I also wanted to upgrade those Separatrons because they weren't as strong as I thought they were going to be. But we're going to switch back over to Ziggy Kerman flying the X05 for its first time. This will be our 5th launch of the year and our final launch of the year. It is currently November. He has a contract to complete, hit 400 meters a second, between 10 and 15K, which we knew he was more than capable of doing. And then after he completes that contract, hits the 15K mark, he is given full permission to max the throttle and try to break the speed record set by NASA in 1953. You can see the focus on Ziggy's face when he does this too. But at this point, we're just going to be kind of gliding up, trying to hit the 15K mark, just so we can complete the last aspect of that contract outside of landing, which is our next big goal. And we are going to just hit that throttle and just go as fast as we can. Now that the contract is complete. Yep, and there it is. Unrestricted speed test approved by Mission Control, and Ziggy Kerman is off. Unfortunately, he doesn't quite break the speed record because he runs out of fuel, and that was probably because we took a more mild ascent profile to keep within that contract's range, but he did manage to hit he hit around 925 meters a second. I'll go back and play that in slow motion and get the exact speed. But either way, he was told to bring her home, so the glide test is now in full function, and Ziggy Kerman is going to attempt to fly back and land at the Space Center. But before he does that, Ziggy Kerman decided he was going to have a little bit of fun in this new X05 plane. So he decided to do some cool little air maneuvers before bringing her in. As you can see the Space Center in the distance, and Ziggy Kerman is happier than he has ever been. Now he just has to very slowly glide and bring this back to the runway. He did unfortunately decide to have too much fun, and he did bleed off a little more speed than he intended to, and he wasn't quite able to make the proper turn to get exactly lined up with the runway in time, which you'll see here momentarily. But he's coming in at a very daring angle, and the Space Center wasn't quite 100% sure what his thoughts were, because he is very, very close. Very, very close to the landing strip, going a decent speed for landing, but he's not quite straightened himself out. He's dropped the landing legs, and here he comes in for a touchdown. Set the brakes, coming in for a last minute turn, and this is where he realized that he did not have enough room to properly line himself up with. So in a last-ditch effort, he attempted to line up with the runway and decided to land in the grass just in front of the runway, as he wouldn't have enough runway to stop if those drogue chutes failed to deploy. This will be the first test for the drogue chutes, and it looks like they were finally successful. And Ziggy Kerman has landed the first X05 plane attempt in the year 1954. And with that, we have completed the construction of the prototype X05. We have gone orbital. We have managed to hit the 30K mark with human spaceflight. We almost managed to break the sound barrier. The speed record. I think we can actually do it next year with the X05 once we finalize its design. But at this point, I'm going to go ahead and wrap the episode up. I want to thank you guys again for stopping by. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Feel free to check out the Discord. I'll leave the link in the description. And other than that, I guess I'm gonna just let you guys go and hope I see you guys in the next year, the year 1955.